the ship moved like a ghost through the belly of the Valen Nebula, wrapped in silence so deep that even the stars could not feel it passing. The HSV Pale Horse was a Spectre-class stealth cruiser, one of humanity's most closely guarded secrets, and it drifted now through clouds of violet gas and ancient dust, with every system running cold, and every soul aboard breathing softly as though the void itself might hear them. Captain Marin Dracoff stood at the center of the bridge with her hands clasped behind her back, and her dark eyes fixed on the wide tactical display that curved around the forward wall like a window into the mind of space itself. She was tall and lean, and carried the kind of stillness that made people listen when she finally chose to speak. Around her, the bridge crew of 12 worked in near silence, their fingers dancing over haptic consoles that glowed a faint blue in the low light. The Pale Horse had been running dark for 9 days now, deep inside the Orion Corridor, on a mission the Galactic Concord did not know about and would not have approved of. Humanity had joined the Concord only 11 years ago, the youngest species in an alliance of 43 races, and in that short time the other species had formed their opinions. Humans were clever but primitive, ambitious but short-lived, emotional but unreliable. They were tolerated the way one tolerates a loud child at a dinner party, with stiff smiles and quiet hopes that the child would eventually learn to behave. What none of them knew, what humanity had never once revealed, was the Null Shroud. It was the most advanced cloaking system ever built by any known species, and it did not merely hide the ship from sensors. It folded the ship's entire energy signature into a pocket of compressed silence, making the Pale Horse less visible than empty space itself. No scanner in the galaxy could find what was not there, and as far as the universe was concerned, the Pale Horse did not exist. "Captain," whispered Lieutenant Amir Sato from the sensor station, his voice barely louder than a breath. "I am picking up energy signatures at the edge of the nebula, bearing 037, distance approximately 400,000 kilometers." Dracoff did not move. "How many?" she asked. Sato's fingers trembled as he worked the console, and when he looked up, his face had lost all color. 314 contacts, Captain," he said. "Zelkari military signatures, heavy cruisers, assault carriers, dreadnoughts. This is a full invasion fleet." A cold silence fell across the bridge. The Zelkari Dominion was not a member of the Galactic Concord and had no interest in joining. They were conquerors, pure and simple, a reptilian warrior species that had spent the last 3 centuries swallowing smaller civilizations and grinding them into dust. The Concord had maintained an uneasy truce with them for decades, but everyone knew the truce was a leash made of paper. And now 300 warships sat in the dark, assembled in secret, waiting. "Can you determine their heading?" Dracoff asked. Sato worked for a long moment, cross-referencing star charts and energy vectors, and when he spoke again, his voice cracked. "Lyrith space, Captain. They are pointed straight at the Lyrith Communion." The bridge crew exchanged glances. The Lyrith were among the most peaceful species in the Concord, a race of bioluminescent beings who communicated through patterns of living light, and who had never once in their long history fired a weapon in anger. They were artists and philosophers and healers, and if the Zelkari hit them with a fleet this size, they would be annihilated before the Concord could even vote on a response. Dracoff closed her eyes for 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, she weighed everything: her orders, her crew, the lives of billions of Lyrith who did not know death was coming for them, and the secret wrapped around her ship like a second skin. If she broke radio silence to send a warning, the transmission could be traced. If it was traced, the Zelkari would know someone was here. If they knew someone was here, they would search, and if they searched hard enough and long enough, they might find the Pale Horse, and if they found the pale horse, the null shroud would no longer be a secret. 11 years of deception, gone. She opened her eyes. "Sato, prep a microdrone for burst transmission," she said. "Load it with everything we have. Fleet composition, heading, energy profiles, all of it. And aim it at the nearest Concord relay beacon." "And us, Captain?" asked Commander Jian Holt, her second-in-command, a broad-shouldered man who had served with her for 6 years, and who knew from her tone that she was not finished. "We stay," Dreykov said. "We keep watching, we keep recording, and we give the Concord every piece of intelligence we can gather before this fleet moves." Holt nodded slowly, though she could see the tension in his jaw. Staying meant lingering inside the perimeter of an enemy armada, with nothing but the null shroud between them and 300 guns. The drone launched 10 minutes later, a device no bigger than a human fist, accelerating away on a cold gas thruster that left almost no trail. It would reach the Concord relay in 6 hours, and from there, the warning would spread at the speed of light to every member world. 6 hours. Dreykov watched it go on the tactical display, a tiny green dot racing away from them into the dark, and for a moment she allowed herself to believe that would be enough. It was not enough. "Captain," Sato said, and this time his voice was sharp with fear. "The Zelkari are deploying a wide-spectrum sensor sweep, military-grade, high-intensity. They are scanning the entire nebula." "They cannot see us," Dreykov said calmly. "No, Captain. But the drone, it left a wake signature. Microparticulate displacement in the nebula gas. The sweep is picking up the trail and they are following it back." Dreykov's calm did not waver, but something behind her eyes shifted. Something old and hard and very human. "How long before they trace it to our position?" "Minutes, Captain, maybe less." She turned to face the bridge crew, all of them watching her, all of them waiting. "Battle stations," she said quietly. "Wake the ship." The pale horse came alive around them. Loss of systems powering up, weapons cycling from cold storage to hot standby, shield generators humming to life deep in the hull, like a heartbeat quickening before a fight. And out in the dark, Warlord Tyvan Cash stood on the bridge of his flagship and stared at the anomaly on his tactical display. A patch of nothing, that was. Somehow not quite nothing. And his predator's eyes narrowed. "Flood that grid with resonance charges," he commanded, his deep voice rumbling through the bridge like distant thunder. "Something is hiding in my shadow, and I want to see its face." The first charges launched, streaking through the nebula like burning stars, and the darkness around the pale horse began to shake. The first wave of resonance charges hit like a hammer against glass, and the null shroud held. Captain Dreykov stood perfectly still at the center of the bridge, while the ship shuddered around her, the cloaking field absorbing the energy pulses and bending them away into nothing. "Shroud integrity at 92%, reported Lieutenant Kira Voss from the engineering console, her voice tight but steady. The second wave came harder, a wall of cascading detonations that rolled through the nebula gas and turned the darkness into a flickering storm of white and violet light. The pale horse trembled, and somewhere deep in the ship, a conduit groaned under the strain. "Shroud at 78%, Voss said. Dreykov did not speak. She watched the tactical display and counted the seconds between each wave, reading the pattern the way a sailor reads the rhythm of the sea. The Zelkari were not aiming at them. They could not aim at what they could not see. But they were saturating the entire grid with enough raw energy to shake loose anything that was hiding. It was crude and wasteful, and exactly the kind of thing the Zelkari would do. The third wave struck, and the lights on the bridge flickered. "Shroud at 51%. Captain, the field is destabilizing faster than projected. The nebula gas is amplifying the resonance effect." "Hold," Dreykov said. The fourth wave came. It was the worst yet, a deep thundering pulse that reached into the bones of the ship and shook them, and across every console on the bridge, the same warning flashed in red. Null shroud failure. Field collapse imminent. And then, the cloak died. It did not fade or flicker or slowly dissolve. It simply stopped, like a candle blown out by a giant's breath. And where there had been empty space, there was now a ship. The HSV Pale Horse hung naked and exposed in the heart of the Zelkari Armada. Dark-hulled cruiser, surrounded on all sides by 300 warships, each one vastly larger than itself. For 5 full seconds, nothing happened. On every Zelkari bridge across the fleet, officers stared at their sensor displays in stunned disbelief as a vessel appeared from nowhere. A vessel that had been sitting inside their formation for hours, without a single alarm, without a single trace, without a single hint that it existed. Then the communications channels erupted. Warlord Tyvan Cash stood on the command deck of the Dominion's Fang, the largest dreadnought in the fleet, and he watched the human ship materialize on his screen, with an expression that shifted from surprise to fury in the space of a single heartbeat. He was enormous even by Zelkari standards, nearly 3 meters tall, with scales the color of charcoal, and eyes like molten copper. And when he spoke, every officer on the bridge went still. "A human vessel," he said, and the words dripped with contempt. "One ship, one small, pathetic human ship, sitting in my fleet like a parasite in the belly of a beast." He opened a wideband communication channel, and his voice boomed across the void to the Pale Horse. "Human Captain, this is Warlord Tyvan Cash of the Zelkari Dominion. You have been caught spying on a sovereign military operation, and your little trick of invisibility has failed you. You will power down all weapons and surrender your vessel immediately. My scientists will study your cloaking technology, and then you and your crew will face judgment. You have 1 rotation cycle to comply. That is approximately 8 of your minutes. Do not waste them." The channel closed. On the bridge of the Pale Horse, every eye turned to Captain Dreykov. She stood with her arms at her sides, looking at the tactical display that now showed their ship as a single blue dot in a sea of red. 314 red dots. Warship, carrying enough firepower to reduce a moon to rubble. Commander Holt moved to her side and spoke in a low voice. "Captain, even if we had full power and a clear escape route, we could not fight our way through that fleet, and we have neither." "I know," Dreykov said. "The Null Shroud is gone. We have nothing to hide behind. I know that too." She was quiet for a moment, and in that silence, the bridge crew watched her the way sailors watch a captain when the storm is too big and the shore is too far. Then she reached forward and pressed the ship-wide communication toggle, and her voice carried to every deck, every corridor, every sealed compartment and cramped bunk on the Pale Horse. "All hands, this is the captain. By now you know our situation. The cloak is down, and we are surrounded by the entire Zelkari invasion fleet. Their warlord has demanded our surrender. He wants the ship, he wants the Null Shroud technology, and he wants us on our knees." She paused. "I need to know right now, is there anyone aboard who is willing to give them what they want?" The ship was silent. Not the silence of fear, and not the silence of resignation, but the silence of 140 people who already knew their answer, and did not need to think about it. Then, from somewhere on the lower decks, a single voice called out over the comm, "No." And it spread like fire, rising from every section of the ship, from the engine rooms, and the weapons bays, and the medical ward, and the cargo holds, the same words spoken by every throat. "No." Dreykov closed her eyes for just 1 second, and when she opened them, they were clear and hard. "Lieutenant Voss, activate the Erebus Protocol." A hush fell over the bridge. The Erebus Protocol was not a battle plan. It was a death sentence with teeth. It overclocked every system on the ship, far beyond safe limits, tripling weapons output. hardening shields to maximum density, and pushing the engines into a state of controlled overburn that would melt the reactor core within 2 hours. It was designed for one purpose: to make the Pale Horse as dangerous as possible for as long as possible before the end came. Voss hesitated for only a heartbeat before her hands moved across the console. Deep within the ship, the reactors screamed to life, with a sound like a star being born in a cage, and every light on the bridge shifted from soft blue to a harsh burning white. The hull of the Pale Horse began to glow as excess energy bled through the armor plating, turning the dark ship into something that looked less like a vessel and more like a blade pulled fresh from a forge. On the Dominion's Fang, a sensor officer turned to Warlord Cash with confusion written across his scaled face. "Warlord, the human ship, its energy output just tripled. Weapons are charging. Shields are at a density I have never seen from a vessel that size. They are not powering down." Cash's copper eyes narrowed. "They are one ship," he growled. "What do they think they can do?" He would learn. Captain Dreykov opened a channel to the Zelkari flagship, and when she spoke, her voice was calm and even, and carried the weight of something very old and very dangerous. "Warlord Cash, this is Captain Marin Dreykov of the Terran Navy. You wanted to see what was hiding in the dark. You uncloaked us. Congratulations." She leaned forward. "Now you get to see what was hiding." The Pale Horse fired first. Twin kinetic lances erupted from the bow of the ship like silver lightning, crossing the void in less than a second, and slamming into the nearest Zelkari cruiser with enough force to crack its forward hull wide open. Before the debris had even begun to scatter, the Pale Horse was already moving, engines blazing white-hot as it dove straight into the heart of the Armada, like a burning arrow fired into a nest of serpents, and every single one of those serpents turned to look. The Pale Horse did not fight the way the Zelkari expected. It did not hold position and trade volleys like a warship was supposed to do. And it did not run like a smaller vessel should when outnumbered 300 to 1. Instead, it fought like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. Like something born from a species that had spent its entire history learning to survive against impossible odds, that had invented ambush tactics and guerrilla warfare and submarine combat long before it ever reached the stars, and that had carried every one of those brutal lessons into the void. The ship vanished, not behind the null shroud this time, but into a micro-jump, a short-range faster-than-light hop that lasted barely 2 seconds and covered only a few hundred kilometers, just enough to disappear from one position and reappear at another before the enemy could react. It blinked into existence behind a Zelkari assault carrier, fired a spread of plasma torpedoes into it, engine block, and vanished again before the carrier's gunners could even turn their turrets. 2 seconds later, it appeared 3 kilometers to the port side of a heavy cruiser, unleashed a kinetic lance that punched clean through the cruiser's reactor housing, and was gone before the ship exploded. The Zelkari fired at where the Pale Horse had been, but it was never there anymore. Sigrid, the ship's combat intelligence, ran the numbers at a speed no organic mind could match, calculating jump coordinates, weapon firing solutions, shield rotation angles, and threat assessments 11,000 times per second, feeding the data directly into the helm and weapons consoles in a seamless stream that the crew translated into action without hesitation. But Sigrid did not command the ship. Captain Dreykov did. And this was the thing the Zelkari could not understand, the thing that no species in the galaxy had yet grasped about human warfare. Technology that made humans dangerous, and it was not the weapons or the shields or even the impossible cloaking field. It was the fact that humans fought with machines and instinct woven together in a way that no purely logical system could predict. Sigrid would calculate the optimal escape vector, and Dreykov would reject it, because her gut told her the Zelkari captain on their starboard side was about to do something reckless. Sigrid would recommend retreating from a pocket of concentrated fire, and Drakov would order the ship to push deeper, because she could feel the hesitation in the enemy formation, the way a predator feels weakness in a herd. The machine was brilliant. The human was unpredictable. Together, they were a nightmare. "Deploy the Hornets," Drakov ordered, and 200 autonomous combat drones launched from the Pale Horse's belly like a swarm of angry metal insects, each one barely a meter across, each one armed with a single, focused energy lance, and enough fuel for 40 minutes of chaos. They scattered through the Zelkari fleet and began to sting. They targeted sensor arrays and communication antenna and engine nacelles, not doing enough damage to destroy any ship, but doing more than enough to blind them, deafen them, and slow them down. The Zelkari formation, which had been an organized wall of death only minutes before, began to fracture. Ships that could not see clearly began firing at shadows. Ships that could not communicate began making their own decisions, and those decisions often contradicted each other. Two Zelkari destroyers collided while trying to pursue the same sensor ghost, their hulls crumpling together in a bloom of fire and twisted metal. A heavy cruiser, its sensors scrambled by Hornets, fired a full torpedo spread at what it believed was the Pale Horse, and instead struck a Zelkari troop transport, killing 4,000 soldiers in an instant. Warlord Cash screamed orders from the bridge of the Dominion's Fang, trying to hold his fleet together through sheer force of will. But the chaos was spreading faster than his voice could carry. And through it all, the Pale Horse kept dancing. It appeared and disappeared like a ghost at a feast, striking and vanishing, each attack precise and devastating, each escape impossible and infuriating. But the Pale Horse was not untouchable. 22 minutes into the battle, a Zelkari battlecruiser got lucky. Its gunner, a veteran of 30 campaigns, did not fire at where the Pale Horse was. He fired at where he believed it would be, leading the target the way a hunter leads a bird in flight, and his plasma volley caught the Pale Horse mid-jump. The blast tore through the portside hull armor and ripped open decks 4 through 7 in a cascade of fire and screaming metal. 18 crew members died in that single hit, some instantly, some in the horrible seconds that followed, as atmosphere vented into the void and the cold reached in with invisible hands. On the bridge, Lieutenant Voss shouted damage reports as red warnings flooded every screen. Hull breach across 4 decks. Emergency bulkhead sealing. We have lost lateral thruster array 2. Port shield emitter is offline. Medical is reporting mass casualties. Commander Holt looked at Drakov, with blood running from a cut above his eye, where a console had shattered. "Captain, the Erebus timer is at the halfway mark. We have less than an hour of reactor power remaining." Drakov gripped the edge of the command console so hard her knuckles turned white. She could hear the ship groaning around her, feel the tremors running through the deck plating as damaged systems fought to keep working. And somewhere below her feet, she knew there were people dying, and people trying to save them, and people sealing broken corridors with their bare hands because the automated systems had failed. She wanted to grieve. She did not have time. "Sigrid," she said, "survival probability." The AI's voice came through the bridge speakers, calm and precise as always. "Current survival probability is 6.2%, Captain. This accounts for remaining reactor time, ammunition reserves, shield capacity, and enemy force disposition." Drakov was quiet for a moment. Then she did something that made Commander Holt stare at her. She smiled. "And if we do something stupid?" she asked. There was a pause, brief, barely noticeable, but for an AI that processed information at the speed of light, a pause was the equivalent of a long and thoughtful silence. "Define stupid, Captain," Sigrid said. Drakov turned to face the tactical display, where the Zelkari fleet was still reeling from the chaos of the Hornets and the microjumps. flagship sat like a wounded beast at the center of the formation, with its command spire already cracked from an earlier strike, where 300 ships that had come here to destroy a peaceful civilization were learning for the first time what it felt like to be afraid. "Target the Dominion's fangs," she said. "Full kinetic lance volley, maximum power. Take the head off the snake." The pale horse turned, burning and battered and bleeding light from a dozen wounds, and it charged straight at the largest ship in the fleet. The kinetic lances fired. 2 silver streaks of compressed matter crossed the void and struck the Dominion's fang, directly in its command spire, and the spire came apart in a fountain of metal and fire that lit up the nebula like a second sun. Warlord Cash survived, thrown from his command chair by the impact, his scales scorched and his copper eyes blazing with a rage that bordered on madness. But his fleet-wide communication array was out, gone, and with it his ability to coordinate the armada. 300 ships without a voice, 300 predators without a pack leader, and in the middle of them all, burning and broken and refusing to stop, the pale horse kept fighting. After 47 minutes of micro-jumps and ambush strikes and impossible escapes, the ship dropped out of its last jump and went still, hanging motionless in the void directly in front of the densest concentration of Zelkari warships. Every weapon on the ship charged simultaneously, and the hull pulsed with a white light that made the battered cruiser look less like a dying ship and more like a star that had decided to be angry. Commander Holt turned to Captain Drakov with open confusion on his bloodied face. "Captain, what are we doing?" "Something stupid," Drakov said. She turned to Lieutenant Sato, who was still at his sensor console despite a broken arm that he had splinted himself with a piece of hull plating and medical tape. "Sato, compile every byte of intelligence we have gathered. The full Zelkari fleet composition, their invasion trajectory, Warlord Cash's tactical orders, the troop numbers, the supply lines, all of it, for wideband broadcast on every Concord frequency we can reach." Sato's eyes widened. "Captain, a wideband broadcast will reach every relay station within 30 light-years. The entire sector will hear it." "That is the idea. But it will also tell the Zelkari exactly what we know and exactly what we have sent. There will be no intelligence advantage left." Drakov looked at him, and despite everything, the burning ship, the dead crew, the impossible odds, there was something in her eyes that looked almost peaceful. "Lieutenant, we are one ship with less than an hour of power left, surrounded by an enemy fleet that wants to take us apart. We have no intelligence advantage. What we have is the truth, and I intend to make sure the entire galaxy hears it before we go dark." Sato nodded once and began working with his one good hand. Sigrid assisted, compiling the sensor logs into a compressed data package that contained everything. Ship ID, every energy signature, every intercepted communication, every scrap of evidence that proved the Zelkari Dominion was about to launch an unprovoked invasion against a peaceful Concord member world. The package was ready in 90 seconds. "Broadcast it," Drakov said. The Pale Horse's communication array, one of the few systems still fully operational, lit up like a beacon and hurled the data into the void on every frequency it could reach. Military channels, civilian bands, diplomatic relays, emergency networks, a scream of information that raced outward at the speed of light in every direction. And riding on top of the data, carried by the same signal, was Captain Drakov's voice. "This is Captain Marin Drakov of the HSV Pale Horse, Terran Navy, broadcasting to all Galactic Concord stations and member worlds. The Zelkari Dominion has assembled an invasion fleet of over 300 warships in the Valen Nebula. Their target is the Lyreth. Communion. The full intelligence package accompanies this transmission. We are one ship, and we have held them. The galaxy now knows what they are. What the galaxy does next is its own choice. But the Pale Horse does not run." The transmission ended. For a moment, Everything was still. Then the Zelkari fleet erupted into chaos. On dozens of bridges across the Armada, captains realized what had just happened. The secrecy of the invasion, the single greatest advantage the Dominion possessed, had been ripped away in an instant by a dying human ship that had chosen to spend its last breath, not on weapons fire, but on the truth. The entire Concord now knew. The Lyrith now knew. Everyone knew. Warlord Cash, standing on the wrecked bridge of the Dominion's Fang, with emergency lights casting red shadows across his scarred face, heard the broadcast through a backup communication terminal, and for the first time in his long and bloody career, felt something he did not recognize. It took him several seconds to understand that it was doubt. "Destroy that ship," he snarled into the terminal, his voice ragged and raw. "Every gun, every torpedo, everything we have, I want that vessel turned to ash." The ships still loyal to Cash, perhaps 200 of the original 300, opened fire. The Pale Horse shuddered as the first volleys struck, and the shields that the Eridus Protocol had hardened to impossible density held for 3 seconds, then 5, then began to crack. Dreykov did not order evasive maneuvers. Instead, she stood at the center of her dying bridge and fought back with everything the ship had left, directing fire at the nearest targets with a cold precision that made the Zelkari gunners hesitate even as they pulled their triggers. The port engine array exploded, torn apart by a concentrated plasma barrage, and the ship lurched sideways as it lost thrust on one. 41 more crew members died in the next 30 minutes, in the engine rooms and the weapons bays and the corridors that connected them, in places where the hulls split open and the void rushed in places where fires burned so hot that the suppression systems could not keep up. Chief Engineer Tomas Reyes, a stocky man with oil-stained hands and a vocabulary that consisted primarily of profanity, kept the reactor alive through what could only be described as mechanical stubbornness. He bypassed safety systems with hand-soldered wires, rerouting coolant through maintenance pipes that were never designed to carry it, and at one point physically held a cracked plasma conduit together with welding clamps and his own body weight while his team sealed it from the other side. He burned his hand so badly that he lost feeling in 3 fingers, and he did not stop working for even 1 second. The Hornets, those 200 small miracles of autonomous destruction, were down to 19 functioning units, and those 19 fought with the same desperate energy as the ship that had birthed them, throwing themselves at Zelkari sensor arrays and weapon emplacements with no regard for self-preservation. But it was not enough. The Pale Horse was dying, and everyone aboard knew it. The reactor was failing, the shields were gone, the hull was more whole than metal, and the ammunition reserves were nearly empty. Dreykov looked at the tactical display one last time and saw what she had been waiting for. New contacts. Not Zelkari. The first to arrive were the Lyrith, their crystalline ships emerging from faster-than-light travel in a cascade of prismatic light that scattered rainbows across the nebula, singing as they came, their hulls vibrating with harmonic frequencies that were equal parts communication and war cry. The Lyrith communion had heard the broadcast, and for the first time in their ancient scenes and gentle history, they had mobilized their defense fleet. Behind them came the Concord Rapid Response Flotilla, a mixed force of warships from a dozen different species, all of them answering the same call, all of them furious. And behind them, emerging from FTL with a kind of brutal precision that made the void itself flinch, came 3 Terran Navy dreadnoughts, the HSV Iron Mountain, the HSV Black Cathedral, and the HSV Unbroken Promise, each one a kilometer-long fortress of armor and weapons that dwarfed even the largest Zelkari vessel. Flanking the dreadnoughts were 12 more Spectre-class cruisers, sisters of the Pale Horse, and as they arrived, they did something that sent a wave of pure terror through the Zelkari fleet. They decloaked. 12 ships, appearing from nothing, from empty space where sensors had shown nothing at all, revealing themselves deliberately and simultaneously in a display that was not tactical, but psychological. That said, we were already here, and you never knew, and there are always more of us than you think. The Zelkari fleet broke. It did not retreat in good order. It shattered, ships scattering in every direction as captains abandoned their warlord and their mission and their courage all at once. Cash screamed for them to hold, to fight, to remember their honor. But honor meant nothing to captains who had just watched a single human ship tear their armada apart for nearly an hour, and who now faced 3 full fleets converging on their position. The rout was total. And at the center of it all, the Pale Horse drifted. Its engines were dead, its weapons were silent, its hull was a ruin of scorched metal and open wounds, and inside it the surviving crew sat in the dark, and breathed, and bled, and held on to each other. The reactor gave its last gasp and died, and every light on the ship went out. Silence. Then, in the darkness, a single system activated. The emergency beacon, powered by its own independent battery, pulsing a signal into the void. The signal was old, older than faster-than-light travel, older than the Concorde, older than humanity's presence among the stars, an ancient Terran naval code that had been used by sailors on Earth's oceans centuries before anyone had dreamed of touching the sky. 2 words, still here. They found the Pale Horse drifting in a cloud of its own debris, dark and silent and broken in ways that made the rescue crews go quiet when they first saw it. The Lyrith tow ship that reached it first wrapped the hull in gravity cradles as gently as a mother lifting a wounded child. And the crystalline vessel's crew, beings of soft light and careful hands, wept in colors that had no name as they guided the shattered cruiser toward Lyrith Station. Of the 140 souls who had served aboard the HSV Pale Horse, 67 were dead. Some had died in fire, and some in vacuum, and some in the terrible spaces between, where the hull had cracked and the air had screamed out into the void. And each one of them had a name and a face and a life that would never be finished. Lieutenant Kira Voss had survived, though she would carry burns across her left arm for the rest of her days. Lieutenant Amir Sato had survived, his broken arm set properly at last. Lyrith healers, whose touch felt like warm light against the skin. Chief Engineer Tomas Reyes had survived, though his hands would never fully heal, and he would spend the rest of his career wearing thin gloves to protect the nerve damage he had earned, holding his ship together with nothing but stubbornness and love. Commander Gian Holt had survived, carrying a scar above his eye that he would never allow to be removed, because he said it helped him remember. Captain Marin Drakov had survived. She had been the last to leave the bridge when the rescue teams came aboard, standing alone in the dark, with her hand resting on the dead command console as though she were saying goodbye to a friend. The ship itself would never fly again. The reactor was slag. The engine arrays were gone. The null shroud emitters had burned out in the first minutes of the battle, and the hull had suffered so much structural damage that the engineering teams who examined it later said, it was a miracle the vessel had held together at all. One Terran Navy engineer, after completing her assessment, simply wrote in her report, "This ship should have come apart an hour before it stopped fighting. It did not. I have no engineering explanation for this." The galaxy reacted the way galaxies do, when something happens that changes the shape of everything. The Galactic Concorde called an emergency session, and for the first time in decades the Great Assembly Hall on Concorde Prime was full. Every seat occupied, every species represented, every eye and sensor and bioluminescent organ focused on the human delegation. Ambassador Lian Chu walked to the speaking platform with the calm, steady stride of someone who had prepared for this moment her entire career. She was a small woman with silver hair and dark eyes that missed nothing, and when she spoke, her voice carried to every corner of the vast chamber without amplification. Existence of the Null Shroud program. She confirmed that the Pale Horse had been operating in neutral space under orders from Terran Naval Command. She confirmed that the intelligence gathered by Captain Dreykov and her crew had been accurate in every detail, and that the Zelkari invasion would have reached Lyrit space within 72 hours if it had not been exposed. She did not apologize. When the Vaishon delegate, a tall insectoid being whose species had long regarded humans with suspicion, rose and demanded to know the full technical specifications of the Null Shroud technology, Ambassador Chu declined. When the delegate pressed further, asking how many cloaked vessels humanity currently operated, Chu paused for a moment that stretched across the silent chamber like a held breath. "Enough," she said. The chamber erupted, but Chu raised one hand and waited for silence, and something about the gesture, its patience, its certainty, made even the loudest voices fall quiet. "Said, I understand your concern," she said, "and I will not pretend that our methods were entirely transparent. We watched from the shadows because we believed the shadows were necessary. And today, 67 of our people are dead because they chose to step out of those shadows to protect a world that was not their own." She looked across the assembly, meeting the eyes of species that had dismissed humanity for a decade, species that had called them primitive and emotional and unreliable. "We watch," she said, "because we remember what it is like to have no one watching for us. Every species in this chamber had allies when they were young, someone older, someone stronger, someone who stood between them and the dark. Humanity had no one. We reached the stars alone, and we learned very early that if we wanted to survive, we had to see the danger before it saw us." She stepped back from the platform. "You may judge our methods, is your right, but you will not question the blood our people paid to keep your world safe, not today." No one spoke for a very long time. The consequences unfolded over the weeks and months that followed, like ripples spreading across a pond. The Zelkari Dominion did not collapse, but it cracked. Warlord Tyvan Cash was dragged before the Dominion's ruling council, and blamed for the greatest military humiliation in Zelkari history, not the failed invasion itself, but the fact that a single human ship had held the entire armada at bay long enough to expose it to the galaxy. He was stripped of his rank and his name, and sent to a border garrison where he would spend the rest of his years, staring at empty space and wondering what was watching him from the dark. Several Zelkari border worlds, seeing the shift in power, began quiet negotiations with the Concord. Small steps, careful and uncertain, but steps nonetheless. The Dominion was not expanding. It was afraid. The Concord voted, after weeks of debate and argument and compromise, to install the remains of the HSV Pale Horse in permanent memorial orbit above Lyrith Prime. The Lyrith had requested this, and they had done so in a way that no delegate could refuse. They had stood before the assembly and changed color, their bioluminescent bodies shifting through patterns of grief and gratitude and awe so beautiful that several delegates wept, and the translation systems had struggled to keep up because the Lyrith were expressing emotions that most languages did not have words for. The ship was placed in a high orbit where it caught the light of the Lyrith sun, and on clear nights the people below could look up and see it, a dark shape against the stars, broken and burned and silent, holding its position the way it had held the line. The Lyrith, whose language was made of living light, created a new color for their vocabulary after the battle, a shade that had never existed before, a deep warm glow like the last light of a dying star that somehow still burned. The closest translation was the light that comes from darkness. It meant human. Captain Marin Drakov returned to the Pale Horse one final time before the memorial placement. She walked through the dead corridors, alone. her footsteps echoing in the silence, passing through sections where the walls were still scorched black, and the floor still bore the marks of desperate repairs made by desperate hands. She passed the sealed compartments where her crew had died, and she stopped at each one and placed her palm against the cold metal and stood there for a moment with her eyes closed. She reached the bridge last. It was dark and empty, the consoles dead, the tactical display blank, the command chair sitting exactly where it had always been, at the center of it all. Time, end. Then she unpinned the captain's insignia from her collar, a small silver emblem shaped like a star, and placed it on the arm of the command chair. She did not say anything. There was nothing left to say. She turned and walked off the bridge and did not look back. 6 months later, in a distant corner of Zelkari space, a patrol ship moved through a sector that its charts listed as empty. The captain, a young officer with sharp eyes and a cautious nature, watched his sensor display as the ship cruised through the silent void. The sensors showed nothing. Space was empty, just as the charts said. No ships, no energy signatures, no anomalies, nothing at all. The captain stared at the readout for a long time. His second officer noticed and stepped closer. "Sir, is something wrong? Sensors are clear." The captain did not answer immediately. He thought about the stories that had spread through the Dominion like wildfire in the months since the Valen Nebula. Stories about a human ghost ship that had appeared from nowhere and fought like a demon and died like a legend. Stories about invisible vessels that might be anywhere, watching, waiting, gathering the kind of knowledge that could bring an empire to its knees. He looked at the empty sensor display one more time. "Change course," he said quietly. "Go around." His second officer frowned. "Sir, there is nothing there." The captain turned away from the display and walked to the far side of the bridge, and his voice was very soft when he spoke again. "That is what the last fleet thought." The patrol ship changed course, and somewhere in the dark, in the silent spaces between the stars, where sensors found nothing and scanners reported empty void, something may have watched it go. Or perhaps nothing was there at all. The Zelkari captain would never know, and he would never, for the rest of his life, be certain. That was the price of ignorance. Not the ships lost, or the plans ruined, or the empire humbled, but the knowledge that would haunt the Zelkari for generations to come. The knowledge that humans had been there all along, invisible, patient, watching, and the darkness would never feel safe again.